Let's
Oh
see.
yeah, I can see you come out of it now.
Am I there? Hi, everyone. Oh,
Hi.
hi. How are you, Montana?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good. Sorry about that. We had, I guess, another call that was booked on the same channel that was up until 6.
No worries.
So I'll just give everyone a minute to join us.
Great.
Where are you located?
Are you
Oh,
Emma?
I'm not. I'm Mackenzie.
Oh, hi, Mackenzie. Well, right now I'm in my home office in Connecticut.
Lovely.
Mm-hmm.
I'm based in Rome, Italy.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
What's Rome like right now?
I would say probably pretty similar as Connecticut. I think a lot of the world is pretty similar at the moment. Yeah. It's not too bad here. Thankfully, the north of Italy is where there's a lot of trouble. So we're in a green zone. So our restrictions are typical, not too bad.
That's good. We have a consultant who works for us out of Basel in Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
And they're pretty strict there.
Oh yeah, definitely. Let me turn this light down a little bit. It's very much in my eyes. Ah, okay, good. I'm not quite so much of a beacon of truth. It's the problem with being pale. As soon as you shine a light at me, I like start to glow like a light bulb. Okay, so it looks like we have a good number of people with us so far. So I think we're probably going to get started. Welcome everyone to our ArtEvolve now bi-weekly series, more or less. So keep your eyes out on the first and the third Thursdays of the month for our event. What we're going to do today is make sure to remember, if you'd like to hang out in the chat and comment on what we're talking about, we would be more than happy to have you participate. Our chat tends to be pretty active. But make sure that when you type a message, it's not just to all panelists. You send it to all panelists and attendees so everyone can see what you have to say. The other piece is we'll definitely do some Q&A at the end, and we'll also take questions during, but if you have a Q&A question that you'd like to be answered at the end, there's a little Q&A button in the toolbar that you can click. And then once you've submitted a question there, other people can upvote your question if they'd also like to hear the answer, so we'll answer them in order of the most popular. All right, so as you all know, at this point, I am Mackenzie and I am the CCO at ArtEvolve. And I'm very excited to have with us today Montana Alexander, who is a partner at Heather James Fine Art. Welcome, Montana.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background.
Sure. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on authenticity, but I'll share my experience as a collector, as a gallerist. I am with Heather James Fine Art. We are a gallery that has multiple locations across the United States, in Wyoming, California, New York. And I've been with that company for about 8 years. Prior to that, I worked for a couple of smaller galleries in New York after I finished graduate school. I went to, I did the Sotheby's art business track. And before that, I got my art history and business management entrepreneurship degree from the University of Connecticut. And Connecticut is where I grew up. 2.5, 3 years ago, I partnered with Heather Sacre and James Corona, who are the founders of the gallery. They started the gallery 25 years ago in California. But we partnered together to open the New York space. So
Awesome.
That's a little bit about me. And we sell, we're in the secondary market, so we sell mostly historic works of art from, I would say, the late 19th century through contemporary.
Wonderful. So we have a very specific reason why you, as a not authenticity expert, are on with us today to talk about authenticity, right? So for those of you who have not seen some of the news lately about Edward Hopper and his early paintings, Montana, will you share with us what's kind of going on in the world of Edward Hopper?
Sure. There was a fascinating article put out with ArtNet News about a few paintings that a graduate student found and connected to instructional art magazines or paintings by other artists in the late 1800s that were copied by a then teenage Edward Hopper as a way of kind of cutting his teeth and honing his skill. And the article went into, how does this affect our understanding of him as an American original? Does it challenge that, or not?
Definitely. Yeah, I think it was really interesting how let's see, I think the magazine is called Art Interchange or something like that, right? And it's a very esoteric, probably small magazine with not much publication that, because of our modern technology, became available to the academic world to make these comparisons. So,
exactly. I don't know how he figured it out, but this is what I love about the art world, is that there's constantly new discoveries being made about artists, artworks, treasure troves, whatever it may be. And I think there was a question of, value. How is value affected? Because we actually had two of the paintings that he mentioned in the article. We sold one, and then another one was listed online for sale in the range of $300,000 to $400,000. And so the question came up, I interpreted that's crazy. Why would someone pay that much money for something that is a copy, right? A copy. So I want to talk about that a little bit.
Yes, please. I'm very much interested. So I'd love to first ask you, though, just to kind of generally kick off the discussion of authenticity, what does authenticity mean to you? It's a big question.
It's a really big question.
So I don't need a textbook definition.
No, and it's funny because I was going to look it up in the Oxford Dictionary and then give you that and then tell you my interpretation. But I mean, we use the word authentic so many different ways. I think that one of the more important points of you hosting this webinar is the evolution of the concept of authenticity. Mm-hmm. And I think that recently, perhaps because we've become more litigious, and perhaps because contemporary society tends to be more concerned with copyright infringement, originality, and there's been many, many fair use cases in the art world specifically about artists who copy other artists' work, and what does that mean? So I think that the intention, in terms of authenticity in the art world, the intention behind it is the most important factor to me personally. So if the intent is to copy and pass it off as my own, that is being inauthentic. If the intent is to copy, say that I'm copying, even if it's a direct copy, and we talk about that a little bit later in examples of that in the art world, but the idea behind it or the reason behind it is an authentic or original idea or reason, then I think that falls under the label of authenticity.
It's very interesting, that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, we also talk about it in terms of being authentic as people, right? Being authentic in our speech, being authentic in the news these days, in social media. How has truth and authenticity, how has that been manipulated in all of these things? So that's a whole other webinar, I think. I'm going to just talk to what I know the most about, which is art, frankly. And just to get back to Edward Hopper, I mean, let me ask you, because you're on more of the logistical side of the art world versus me, I'm more on the sales and marketing side of the art world. So what is your concept of authenticity?
Well, thank you for throwing it back to me. I like that. So just to give, so I am in sales and marketing, but for art technology. So my perspective is definitely from the side of technology. You know, in terms of, because ArtCheck is condition reporting, a lot of what we're interested in is authenticity. We are currently working on a big partnership project that's called the Art Identification Standard. That's all about actually figuring out how can we use technology to identify not only the authenticity of existing art or older pieces of art, but going into future, if a piece of art is created today, how do we verify its authenticity 100 years from now using technology from the point it's been created? So I think the questions of whether or not if someone makes a copy in a, let's say, an authentic manner, in the sense of that they're being honest about making a copy, I don't necessarily think that from a technology point of view, I can't decide whether or not that's authentic or not. But I could decide whether or not it was done by that person's hand, right? I think that's probably, you know, if we can verify somehow that it was actually done by the artist who said that they did it, that is something that's, I think, more black and white, more easily to say, okay, that's authenticity. But I think the questions around authenticity and sort of creative originality is another layer of the topic that is definitely worth delving into a little bit.
For sure. I went to, a couple of years ago, Christie's did a symposium on, they hosted a symposium on artificial intelligence in the art world. And
Yeah.
I was way out of my sphere going there and listening to, you know, incredibly intelligent tech people talk about developments that they're making towards that same end. And that's what you were talking about a little bit. I saw some fascinating things there that I haven't seen being used because, like I said, my gallery, we mostly deal in pretty recent art. But I would imagine that a lot of the technology, for example, I don't know what it's called, but there was a programmer who talked about and showed us this program that he made, that by showing a picture of a painting by anyone from Da Vinci to Picasso to Damien Hirst, it analyzed the brush strokes and then would spit back at you this image showing, you know, red brush strokes where it was not similar to the artist's, or green brush strokes where it was similar to the artist's. And so you would, you know, come up with your own decision, I guess, based on that technology.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, is that in many cases, technology can only go so far, right? And at the end, technology itself is not smart. The people who, like you said, the people who create technology are smart. Technology itself is stupid. It doesn't make decisions for you. So not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not the technology we're talking about. But anyway, to go back briefly to the example at hand of Edward Hopper.
Please.
So I often am concerned with value and authenticity, right? Because you'll see in the old masters world, things being sold, you know, from the studio of, or in the manner of certain artists. And the values for those are much, much lower, obviously, than for if it's confirmed or attributed to be by the actual artist, him or herself.
Right.
For Edward Hopper, he's not like other artists who are terribly prolific in their painting. So to give you an example, in the past roughly 40 years at auction, there have only been 40 paintings by Hopper that came up for sale. Warhol had close to 5,000. Hearst had, you know, several thousand. Koons, whoever, you know, is painting more prolifically, the examples go on and on. So he's one of the, there's a lot of them in museums. There are not a lot of Hopper paintings in private hands. That's why you see, you know, Chop Suey, the big sale of his, going for almost $100 million recently. The paintings that we had in the gallery at the price that they were at and I want to talk also about what my thoughts were when the article came out, because I thought, frankly, this makes those paintings more interesting to me. Because before, we thought that they were paintings by a teenage Edward Hopper of his home in Nyack, or of the area of Nyack, right? And that's a very nice idea. It's a bucolic idea, this young artist going out and painting perhaps in plein air. But I find it even more interesting that he was so precise and wanted to not just take it, as his, the other artists of the time would have been doing and painting outside and painting from life. He did something that is actually a very, very traditional way of learning how to paint or how to draw, which is, the mimetic tradition of going into the Louvre. The Louvre allows a certain amount of people in every year. Salvador Dali used to go into the Louvre and paint masterpieces and just repaint them to the best of his ability to learn how to do it. So that's what Edward Hopper was doing. He was doing something that artists have done for centuries to learn how to paint. And I like thinking about him doing that as an American painter, going to that kind of European tradition, but doing it from a publication or other
American source.
Regional American artists. I think that's fascinating. So to me, giving artwork more context and the more research we have, that always adds value. The more you know about a provenance, the more you know about, the collector who had it before. I think that's far more interesting. And frankly, so the paintings that we had are quite small. If those paintings were done in his more traditional style when he was older, in the 20s or 30s, I think conservatively, they would be worth around $10 million today.
Wow.
So the value of these, as if you want to call them ephemera, you can call them ephemera, but the value of these paintings that he was doing as a child are a fraction of the value of what they would be. Even if I'm way off on that, I'm not terribly far off. Let's call it even 5 to 10 million for a painting in his normal style.
Sure.
It's, less than 5%, less than 10% of the value of that for this style of painting. So I think that contextually is important to point out. He's also not passing off these paintings as anything other than his own studies, because he signed, at least the ones that we had in the gallery, with his own name. So it's not like they're not forgeries, which would be intrinsically inauthentic.
It would be fascinating if Edward Hopper was a forgerist.
It kind of would be, right?
Yeah.
And there are people who collect famous forgeries.
Yeah, that's true. So essentially, he never said it was anything that it wasn't, but obviously when he's not with us anymore, so we had to understand, we had to try to guess as, our professionals, what these paintings were. And the best guess up until now was that they were of his home when he was a child.
Exactly.
So, yeah. And therefore, I think you're right. The more information that we have, kind of the fuller the backstory is, and the more real it feels, right? That if we actually have the true kind of information of what that work was actually from. So speaking of kind of going, thinking back in time, how do you think the concept of authenticity has evolved in the last century?
Well, I think we are much more, through technology, as we were saying earlier, we're much more able to access a lot of information. And therefore, we are necessarily more interested in proving authenticity. So 100 years ago, 200 years ago, when you would go in to buy a painting from a gallery, you would be doing that based on the word and the reputation of that gallerist and the written provenance and perhaps paper trail of that painting, depending on which artist you're talking about. Now, that is also true to a point, but the number one question that we get asked by people who don't know much about collecting art, let's say, or are just starting to collect art, is how do I know it's real? Right? Mm-hmm. And so we go to extreme lengths, and auction houses go to extreme lengths, as well as private dealers, private galleries, to prove that authenticity to people. the difficult part is that each artist is its own realm of authenticity understanding. So it's going to be, you're going to have certain experts that you can go to for certain artists to prove authenticity where you can't with others. There's also foundations which have been founded and then disbanded, right? If you look at the Herring Foundation or the Warhol Foundation, whenever you're looking at buying one of those pieces or doing anything with one of those pieces, you better make sure that there's a stamp on the back, there's a piece of paper. But I mean, I've been offered more fakes by those artists than other artists because they are frankly easier to fake. And you can also fake the paperwork. So that's where it pays to know the right people connected with the right artists in the art world, because you can go to those experts and say, hey, this person just brought this piece into me, here's the information, does it match up with what you have? Or go to the writers of the catalog raisonné and say, I see, you know, this piece in the catalog, I was just offered it, do you know its whereabouts today? Does that match with what I know? And people need that level of verification, especially as more and more people buy art online, right? Because they're not walking into your gallery. They can't see that you are an established brick and mortar and a human being. You could be anyone. And a lot of people are very, very wary of, and rightfully so, of getting ripped off or getting taken advantage of. So the ability to prove that, I think the one of the, I forget his name, which is a shame, but one of the heads of Artsy is really pushing the idea of blockchain technology in the art world to secure provenance information. Yep. And I am not going to pretend to know anything about blockchain. I've been to a few talks on it, but it would be another layer or another level of certainty for people who are all agreeing, right, that, okay, we all agree that this was the, you know, the chain of custody for this painting over time.
Right, yeah, that's exactly what the art identification standard is about, is potentially blockchain, maybe other technology being used to essentially have all these different sources of different pieces of the provenance be able to kind of plug into this central uncorruptible database, right? Where all of the information kind of comes through in a history. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think something like that is definitely important as we move forward. And we now kind of see, like you were saying, you know, paperwork can be copied and stamps can be copied. And, you know, it would be very interesting if you could sort of have an undeniable source of authenticity. And if that would change what authenticity means even further, right? So
right, and then is that level of, I mean, is that level of confirmation going to be necessary for everything that you buy from then on out? Does that become the new standard, or is that right, just something that's going to be applied to certain artists, right? So like Calder is a great example. I'm going to apologize because I have a 1-year-old, so you might hear him making some peeps in the background.
Oh, that's fine, no worries.
Alexander Calder is a great example of that. I think that the Calder Foundation has done a tremendous job of making sure that each one of his original works carries with it an authentication number throughout all of time. And they keep that information kind of locked up tight, and then whoever buys a piece or donates a piece or whatever the case may be can go to them to verify that number. And so they have to verify it in order for it to be, you know, sold or resold.
Right, but in that case, that was instituted during his lifetime, right? So it was almost a decision of the artist to authenticate his own art that way, which if we go back and, you know, we went to like, you went to the Grand Masters and we were like, I would like to verify my Botticelli, please. You know, he didn't do like a numbering system. Would be great, would make things a lot easier.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people would be excited and a lot of people would be disappointed who own those masterpieces today.
Fair. And I think in that case, then, I guess perhaps if we're thinking about authenticity and we're going farther back in time, then there's almost a greater margin of error the farther back you go, right, in terms of determining authenticity. So How do you feel about that? And that you can't be as sure about authenticity for a work from 1500 as you can about one from 2000.
I'll say I so rarely deal in old masters paintings. I should have.
Sure.
My colleague.
Or 1800. You know,
Okay,
even then.
1800 is a little bit easier than 1500, I'll say. But you're right, absolutely. The further back in time it goes, the more dedicated you're going to have to be to really sleuthing around and figuring out what was done to the piece. Because also at that point you get into restoration work, as we saw with, you know, the biggest example is Salvator Mundi, which was not recognizable until they did a beautiful job on it and restored it to what it was before, because previous restoration was terrible. So not only do you have to, and that's an interesting question too, of like, how would we do that with blockchain? Because you can't have ghosts confirming, you know, the past information about the piece. You can have experts confirming the past information about that piece, but then everyone's going to have to agree on it at some point. And in my understanding, limited as it may be, of the old masters market, there's just constant there's constant scholarly work being done in order to figure out or make attributions, make new attributions. And often what I do know from a market perspective is that art dealers will buy things that are not attributed to the artist, but they think, in their opinion, it could be, and they will sponsor research to be done on that piece so that maybe it's provable down the line, and then they've just made an incredible investment, right? Because they've bought it at a fraction of the price because it was thought to be the school of Botticelli than truly Botticelli. But if they can prove it and stand behind it, then as we've seen, they can make a pretty good amount of money.
Yeah, that's true. That's interesting. If something is kind of in the world of a particular artist, authenticity definitely is deeply connected with value. So let's go back to this question we were talking about before, and bringing back in Edward Hopper in terms of authenticity versus originality. So can something, you know, you were saying something can be authentic if it was done, you know, without malice by the hand of the artist. And it doesn't have to be creatively original in order to be authentic. I'm curious what some of our audience thinks. Do you think the same as Montana? Do you think that something can be authentic and not creatively original? Or does it have to come from the mind and the artistic, you know, soul of the artist?
Also, if it's helpful, I can share my screen and pull up the article that was written so you guys can see some of the paintings that we're talking about compared side
we'd love
to side.
to see the art.
Okay, let's.
That sounds great.
Oh, I have to.
While people chime in.
I have to be enabled.
Oh, let me do that. There you go.
So this is Hopper's, and you can maybe see he signed it right here, E. Hopper. And then this is a Edward Moran painting.
Yeah. So I mean, it's not an identical copy, right?
No, none of them are.
It's a study.
Yeah, they're all just studies, which is different than, you know, people who will actually go in and try and copy it to the best of their ability to learn from it. So I think that informs us about who Edward Hopper was as a young artist, again, that he wasn't making a direct copy.
Yeah. Yeah, in some of these cases, I guess, is that a black and white photo, or did he do it in grayscale on that second one?
I don't know. It says photo from the Frick. So it's possible it was Cressai, but I have a feeling it's probably just the old photo.
Oh, okay. And so is this one of the other ones that you had?
Yeah, this is one of the other ones that we had.
So the left is Hopper
This is
and the
Hopper.
right. Interesting. I think also the fact that I find it very interesting just about Hopper himself and who he was, what we can kind of learn about who he was, that he was choosing to copy these paintings and not the grandmasters, or kind of, I think, the typical examples of the paintings that you might copy as a young artist.
Right. And so this one in particular, I thought was really cool because it's a tray featuring the same composition. And so by an unknown artist. So it's possible that this was something that was mass produced as much as it could have been at that time. And he had a similar one, or had this one, and used what was around in order to, take inspiration. And then the other ones from the Art Interchange magazine, I mean, magazines were much more expensive and difficult to come by in the late 1800s.
Right.
So, his love of art was obviously supported by his family. This is one of the paintings based on this one. And that he was choosing scenes that were similar, right? Because these were mistaken for Nyack scenes. So he was choosing scenes that were similar to his own surroundings. I find interesting as well.
Right. And so let's see, Ricardo has said, I think in the art world we exist in today, it's very hard to be original. Yeah. There are very few ideas that are original. We say this in technology as well. It's not just in the art world. This concept that, anything you come up with, someone has probably come up with it before. It's just whether or not they were able to get it off the ground. And I think it's the same thing with art, right? A lot of people probably paint very similar things. It's just whether or not your work becomes famous or not in terms of who sees it.
Absolutely. And I think that you can take the word, as you're saying, you can take the word art out of Ricardo's statement, and it's true. I think it's difficult in the world today to be original, when there are billions of people creating art through photography on Instagram. It's very difficult to be original in that way. But that's, again, why I guess I marry authenticity and originality with intention.
Yeah. Oh, I'm almost saying one thing I think was missing from the article is more information about how they figured out these were copies. Did they go into the Art Interchange archive? Was it a chance discovery? I think that's very interesting. How did they find this in the first place?
I don't know. I mean, that we didn't find it. Sanborn didn't find it in their research. The Hopper House didn't find it in their research. I think it was I don't know how it started, but I have a feeling that, I mean, he was a graduate student, so it was part of a project. And I immediately, when I read the article, I thought, was it a Google image search? Because often what we'll do in the art world personally is when we see a work that we don't know, or we see an artist we don't know, we'll try and identify it through a reverse image search on Google. And so that's possible too. I don't know what I don't think the article got into his methodology, but it could have been something as simple as that.
Yeah, just at that point in time, the Art Interchange magazine had put their digital archives public. And so he was able to find that match. That'd be interesting. Sarah says, I'm a curator of historical prints where the goal has often been to expertly make mass-produced replicas of fine art. Yeah. So then the question is, again, about authenticity. Is the kiss that I have on my wall from Klimt, is that authentic? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, prints are a whole other animal too, right? Of understanding and of method and art making and intention. So I think mass production is very interesting to me in the art world. I think mass production is very much part of our contemporary artists' output. Most of the major artists when I was coming up in the art world were from that same, Warholian idea of the factory, which is actually a very, again, no new ideas, no originality. It's a very, very old idea. You go back to Dürer or any of the old masters who would have had studios of people helping them turn things out. Same idea, different concept, different output.
Yeah. Well, and also if you think about, at just me going back with my art history degree, I'll go back a little bit farther into like the turn of the Renaissance, right? Where in many cases, in order to get to the height of the Renaissance, they were copying ancient work and they weren't passing it off as their own, but in some cases, you'll find Renaissance copies of ancient statues that have had to be very carefully analyzed in order to understand when it came from, right? Even just going down to like doing chemical analysis of the material. So
absolutely.
is,
I'm reading Fingerprints of the Gods, which is basically calling into question our contemporary understanding of the age of advanced societies. So what we used to think was Mayan, we found out was actually Olmec, right? And perhaps even older than that. It's a little bit conspiratorial, but it's very interesting. And so for so long, when we discovered Mayan ruins, we thought that these were the people who built these things. Come to find out, they were just taking care of these things, and they were already there. They were already built by a much, much older civilization that they were told about. So I think that that's very interesting too. And so our whole concept of who the Mayan people were was radically changed by that. And we know almost nothing about Olmec culture and technology and everything like that.
Yeah, I think these cases kind of go back all the way to the beginning of human civilization, and the first examples we have of art is kind of figuring out who created it, who stewarded it, who copied it. And then, what did that copying bring about? Did it bring about another cycle of art of a different period? So yeah, I think I want to agree that in many cases, the question of originality maybe doesn't apply when you're talking about authenticity. So I'd be interested to hear, because you were talking before about your process when you do your research, and the Edward Hopper Association did their research, and when you get a work that is maybe less known, has less of a sort of public provenance, what type of research do you do in order to figure out authenticity?
We rely on outside experts because the nature of our gallery is that we don't specialize, right? We don't specialize as much as other galleries do, or departments. They have departments, in Sotheby's and Christie's have certain departments where the experts are in those departments. So we go to our colleagues in the art world who know far more than we do in certain instances. We have internal experts who we've hired who come from, different backgrounds. And so I have someone who knows a lot more about old masters. Jim, my business partner, knows pretty much everything there is to know about Monet. So I'm relatively certain that if I'm shown something or we're considering something with certain artists, we can handle that internally. But there are absolutely many, many times where we go to, actually right now, we got in a Picasso painting recently, and we're talking to the Picasso Museum about it, specifically to the director about it, because there's a marking on the back that we don't understand. We know that a photograph exists that the work was based on that we haven't seen. And so those institutions obviously have vast amounts of records and the ability to dedicate research to those, to knowing about those things more than we do. So we have to rely on one another in the art world to get to the bottom of some of these mysteries.
Yeah, I really like that, this kind of concept of the the public sphere, art world sphere, and the private art world sphere really collaborating on this question. Particularly, it seems like one of the areas where, you know, museums and galleries overlap the most tends to be on questions of authenticity and provenance. Is that right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we collaborate on other social things, or accessions or deaccessions. So, but the most important work, I think, for both of us is knowing about what's out there, sharing information about what's out there. Because the more we do that, we've found works that they didn't know about, and then they help us do the research to say, oh, it was in this place, it was owned by this person, this is who that is. It becomes increasingly difficult, I will say, to the person who deals in prints. I think prints become increasingly difficult to do that with, as and the parameters have to be that much tighter and stricter with prints and multiples. In photography especially, we don't deal a lot in photography, but because there will often be multiple printings of the same image, it's not just one time and then the negative is destroyed. Sometimes they'll archive the negative and then print it years and years later, and you have to make sure that that's an allowable printing. So that's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, the authenticity of
really
photography is complicated.
Yeah, that's really difficult. And to your point, and what's wonderful about technology in the art world and what you guys are doing is it makes it that much easier on us, because time is always money. So if there is a fast and reliable way to authenticate something, it's going to be a no-brainer. It's just that reliability part that gets tricky, because we want to go to Descharnes for Dali, and that's our chosen expert. But there have been people dispute whether or not Descharnes is the expert on Dali. There's, Modigliani, it has to be in the Chironi catalog. And there are tons of Modiglianis out there that are offered around and maybe even bought and sold that are not in that catalog, because some people agree that Chironi didn't get it right and some people disagree. So
Right.
I think
everything is created by people, and we're all able to make mistakes.
And I think someone said, oh yeah, Fred Scott said at the beginning of our conversation, was insightful, it's about correct attribution. So once that is done, it's done, and you just have to confirm it as the piece moves through time.
So, it's interesting we're talking about, I think we brought up catalog resumes a fair amount in this conversation. This is something that we've looked into as Articheck, as condition reporting platform, to actually create within our platform a space for catalog resumes. Because I think that, sometimes catalog resumes only have so much information, but if you actually had a condition report for every item in a catalog resume with all of the markings and all of the, that would, make things even easier to identify. I think one of the things that I have the biggest fear about, just coming in as like an art lover and an basic art historian, I don't have a PhD, but is the idea that we have one expert on Dali and we have one expert on Hopper, and what happens when they are gone, So yes, people continue to focus on these things and they learn underneath the current experts, but sometimes artists fall out of fashion. And so in that case, people don't study them for a period of time, and one expert passes or leaves the field and there's no one to replace them. What do we do at that point if we don't have their knowledge somewhere in record?
Absolutely. And as so many things in the old art world it's just tradition. And so it goes back to, their plan is usually to pass it along to a son or a daughter, frankly. And that's who we see taking up the helm. It's families of artists, it's friends of artists and friends of families of artists who keep these things alive. But you're right, it's not really sustainable over hundreds and hundreds of years. And so technology can and should definitely help with that.
Great. Well, I'd love to see, oh, Annika just mentioned, yes, the catalog resume template to annotate log materials techniques visually as well. Yeah. So if anyone just who's on the call is interested in that, we're happy to talk to you about that. Send us an email. So what I'd like to get into now is if anyone has any questions or topics that have come up on the top of their mind. I think we've discussed quite a lot, so we'll see how many questions there are. But any thoughts that anyone has on this topic, or anything they think that we missed that we should bring up or chat about? Feel free to put it into the chat or into the Q&A section. Oh, and thank you, Annika, for showing the pictures. That was great. Thank you for sharing those with us, Montana. Anyone have any?
I'm going to share some more pictures in the meantime.
Yeah, please. In the meantime, sounds great.
Of copyists. So these are images of people who go into museums specifically to learn and copy master works or master paintings. And I think that some of the photographs of them doing it is really beautiful.
Wonderful. Oh, wow. See, you know, if I were actually a good enough artist to be able to get one of these passes, I would be much too messy. My paint, when I just do stuff for fun at home, flicks and flies. I can't imagine having to do that in the Louvre.
I know. And like this, so this is a really interesting, right? Like whoever took this photo made a work of art in and of themselves. So it's a work of art of someone copying a work of art. So it's actually a direct copy, a photo of a copy of the original. And it's beautiful. Oh, wow. It's beautiful to me. And it does call into question, you know, the idea of originality and the intentions. Here's a few other little ones. This guy's embroidering.
Authenticity and inception.
Yes.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Often there'll be, I guess, copyists are required to make things in different scale. And of course, always like they're signed and stamped when they leave, so that art forgers can't just go in there and work willy-nilly.
Sure.
This is an old print of students doing the same thing in the late 1800s.
So Chris asks, to what extent are you working with conservation scientists and conservators in authentication?
It rarely comes up for us unless it's an exceptionally high value, questionable work, which we will rarely get to that point, frankly. We work with conservators in almost every instance to do professional condition reports on what we sell. But I think that Chris's question would be better answered, frankly, by someone who deals with older art, because when I was talking about, you know, art dealers who will buy things without attribution and then work to get those things attributed, they will often have to go to professional conservators and conservation scientists to do really in-depth analysis of the paint, of the canvas, et cetera, and all the materials. So
right.
that is done. It's not something that I can really speak to from personal experience, though. We do it. We do have some antiquities in the gallery, I will say, because the gallery started out as an Asian antiquities gallery, and so there. Every once in a while, when we're dealing with a major work of antiquity, we'll have to show carbon dating reports, which really are just not so much for attribution in those cases, but just for date range.
Right. That would actually be quite an interesting follow-on webinar to this one, talking about authenticity of ancient work. So yes. I think we have some conservation scientists who actually use ArtEvolve, so we'll have to pull them on, I think, to talk about that. So let's see, another question that's brought up is, what do you think about Dr. Sancini's idea that up to 40% of art in museums may be fakes due to the tax incentives of donors or forward donors?
I don't know about that percentage. it's a shocking percentage, but I think that the percentage is higher than most people think that it is. So if it's 40% or if it's 30%, I think most people think it's probably less than 5%, but it's definitely more than that, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that it has to do entirely with the tax incentive for donors. Those incentives are important in why people donate to museums, but it's also a legacy, and there's also a lot of collectors who don't have children who want to take that work, and so they decide that it should be property of the world. And because every work of art is a piece of cultural heritage, eventually, I always say eventually it needs to end up in a museum somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I think that with technology, museums and dealers, every single dealer and auction house, no question, has sold something that is fake without knowing it. No question. Because there's only so much you can do for certain artists. There's only so much you can do for certain artworks. And even if you go to the nth degree, there are bad actors, as we've seen in the art world, who will also go to the nth degree to convince you and show that it is real. I think by working together, we can all get better at that through collaboration with museums, through collaboration with one another. And I would hope that that percentage of fakes go down. But I also think in a more philosophical way, if let's say 40% is the right figure, if 40% of the things that I'm walking around and seeing in museums are not done by the artists that they're attributed to, how much, if I don't know that for sure, how much does that really affect the purpose of the art? To me, the purpose of art is not affected by that. The purpose of art is to me, it's the only objects we have on this planet which are spiritual in nature. And I don't mean that in a religious way. I mean, they have no function other than to inform and make us feel things. So to me, if I'm looking at a Dali painting that is moving me and it's attributed to Dali, but then I find out it's not actually by Dali, does that change the feeling that I had? To me, no, because that feeling is authentic. But the work is not authentic. So that's a little bit more philosophical of an answer, but I think that's an important thing to keep in mind so that you don't go walking around museums jaded by all the fakes.
Carmen says, it does not change the feeling, but the price.
Absolutely.
Very rational of you.
Yes, absolutely changes the price.
Right. But I guess then the question becomes, because it's less valuable monetarily, does that mean it should no longer be displayed to the public if it has such an emotional effect on people? Maybe it doesn't matter. It's monetary value.
I think it does matter, because I think then the museum would be, if they didn't say this is a fake, the museum would then be, putting people on.
Oh no, if they say it's a fake, but they leave it up. Because I think in a lot of cases, when things are deemed to be fake, they get hidden in the back of the storage unit, right? They get put away, far away. So maybe kind of being more open about those things wouldn't be terrible. Like you were saying, kind of working together and being transparent. So Ricardo says, Montana, have you personally come in contact with an artwork that you later found out was fake?
Yes, many, many times, almost on a, I would say, every other week basis, I'm shown an artwork that is fake.
Wow. And how do you figure that out?
Kind of the way that we were talking about. Well, initially, 99% of the time, I just know, because it's an artist that I know well, or
someone just opens their trench coat and shows you a work of art.
Yeah, it's a lot of intuition at first. Once you've been in the art world for a little while, I think you can kind of make that call just initially a lot easier. I'm going to apologize that I'm moving inside and outside. I know
that's
that's
fine.
distracting, and so I just don't want it to be noisy in there for us.
You have a beautiful set of stairs behind you. It's very picturesque, in fact.
So yeah, at first it's just a gut feeling one way or another that I'll have. But if I don't know, most of the time I'm wary based on the source, right? So if it's somebody that I don't know about or someone that I can't find out much about, I will try and really vet and verify the sources of where you're getting, where the art is coming from. And as with Knoedler, the famous case of Knoedler, and that is where they went wrong, because they wanted to believe so much in these masterpieces that were coming out that they looked past some of the mystery of the true owner of the work. And if they had just done a little bit more research or digging initially, that would be a completely different story.
I think, yeah, sometimes we want something to be true, right? I think that's definitely, humans are not perfect. So Elizabeth says, I agree, authenticity does not necessarily always equate to attribution. Authenticity can certainly be about experience. For example, when the Met was a very young institution, it was filled with plaster casts of antiquities because of lack of access to the original objects. The casts were important tools for learning, and I'm sure also did have an emotional or spiritual impact on people.
Absolutely. That's fascinating. I didn't know that about the casts.
Wow. Yeah. I think, and again, that comes back to the question of like mass production of works and copies of works. And, you know, even to the point, if you look at very high end production and you look at technology like 3D printing, the fact that you can now 3D print a copy of David and put him in your front hall, you know, for, you know, a fraction of the price it would cost to buy the David. Well, no one can buy the David, but you know what I mean, is, you know, how close can you get to the original, kind of, rather than it just being a glossy photograph.
Absolutely. And I have clients who loan things to museums for years, but they want to enjoy the work. So we've, in many instances, hired professional copyists to copy the work. And of course, there's safeguards put in place so that they can't resell that work. Like, you know, things with the back of the canvas, or it's a different size, or it isn't signed where the real one is signed, or whatever. There's many layers of that, but so that they can hang the replica of that work in their home while they wait for 3 years for the Louvre to be finished with their painting. And then they'll usually and those paintings cost thousands of dollars. They're not kind of easy things to create. And so often they won't destroy those paintings, but they'll maybe put it in an office somewhere of theirs or put it in a different home.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't even realize I didn't even think about that. That's really interesting. So there must be quite in that case, then there's kind of a market for high-end copyists.
Absolutely. A copyist
kind of a fine line to forgers.
Absolutely. If you're a good copyist, you can make a boatload of money doing that for people.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah, and then you get back to that question of, if you want sort of the emotional experience with the work to stay in your home, even when it's on loan, the copy is, you know, good enough for the meantime. So.
And your friends don't know.
And your friends don't know. Unless it's, you know, like a miniature of the actual size of the work you were saying. It's different dimension.
Yep.
Fred says, when I saw the Van Gogh in the Courtauld collection, the somewhat sweetness expression of the eyes surprised me. Sometime later, I saw that a manager at archives in Den Haag questions its authenticity.
But you remember it. Look at that. You remember the eyes, right? Yeah. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And Emma says, there's even a copy of David in Piazza della Signoria in Florence, while the real one is a few steps down the street inside the Galleria dell'Accademia. That's right, because David was originally outside and then they've moved him inside to protect him. Yeah, so is the outside, I think the funny part too, is a lot of people take pictures with the outside one, thinking it's the real one. They may not know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, wow. Well, I very much enjoyed this, Montana. Thank you so much on sharing all of your insights with us. And we really loved those pictures, particularly the ones of the people
I'll send them.
practicing. We'd love to send them if you'll send them to us. Yeah.
Sure.
And we'll share that with
Absolutely.
everybody in the recording tomorrow, along with some a link to that Edward Hopper article. So thank you everybody for joining us today. And thank you again, Montana. And we will see you in a few weeks.
Thank you. You guys are great. Everybody should use Art I Check reports. They revolutionized our business. Just a little plug for you.
Thanks, Montana. I appreciate that. All right, everyone. Have a good
Bye-bye.
evening. Goodbye.